Okay, so my name is Jodie Peebles, and I am in the San Diego County area. I work for Chula Vista Elementary School District as a project manager and coach of our ECE department, which covers special ed, transitional kindergarten, and preschool. Previously, I worked at the County Office of Education for 7 years, where I was also a coach, and I had the opportunity to be trained with Dr. Uri Mendez. At that time, I met my co-presenter, Cara Casares, and she actually works at a medical district, so I'm going to turn it over here to her so she may introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Cara Casares, and I currently work with National School District, and I am the coach for the teachers as well as the instructional assistants in the classrooms. And I was with the San Diego County Office of Education for, I think, I was just short of my 20-year mark. And I started out coaching family child care providers, which was probably one of my favorite things that I had ever done. And then I coached with the County Office of Education just all over San Diego County. And that's where I met Jodie. We were both coaches and for the County Office of Education. And then we both left.
And branched out. So
and we are I think we are very happy where we're at this point in our lives.
Yes. So I wanted to kind of gauge our audience and was wondering if you all would mind just putting in the chat very quickly what group grade level that you're currently working with, and is your role coaching? Are you in another role? If you could just put your role and what grade level that you specifically work with. Okay, you've got program specialists, educator 0 to 5, coach educator, okay, birth to 5. We have high school, 7 through 12. Okay, great. So we've got a very diverse population of coaches here, which I'm super excited about because of what we're going to be presenting today. Although this tool was created by many experts in our ECE field, it's created for all grade levels. And Cara and I have been working with it since it was published in 2018. And I'm not going to get too much into it because we will get through it in a couple of slides. But why this topic today, equity-oriented reflection? We've all been through it this year across our nation. We've seen the inequities and social injustice and horrific things happening in our country. And we know that families have been impacted on different levels. And some of these families are going to be coming to us. And we want to have a gauge for ourselves to ensure that all families, one, are feeling welcome. But two, how are we increasing our skills to ensure that we are always coaching from an equity-oriented space and lens? Cultural perspectives of children and families, as we know, can widely range in different levels, depending on our own experiences, depending on our own upbringing. And we know, as you do as well, any coach or educator that's able to think from that more multicultural perspective are going to be more successful at really understanding others and being able to really build on that relationship. It's interesting we watched that TED Talk today because we'll probably hit on some of that when Cara goes on to the next slide. So with that being said, Miss Cara, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, so relationships in our lives are important with our families and especially in our work. It's important to be able to get along with others. And so when I look at what we have in front of us, the slide in front of us, I kind of imagine like a star being drawn, because I think all of these are connections, families to teachers, children to the community, families to the community. I think all of these are connected together. And I really think that when any of these topics or what we're looking at right here communicate with each other, I really think that it needs to be a strength-based approach, and always focusing on a strength-based approach with a coach to a teacher to children, a teacher to family. And in order to do that, we have to be positive, thinking about the, being equitable. And also we have to think about when we have these relationships with each other, how it trickles down into other families and other relationships with each other. And so if you think about, if you're a coach and you're going to build a relationship with a teacher, what are some things that you can do to build a relationship with a teacher? I'm going to actually ask for feedback. What are some things that you can do to build a relationship with a teacher? Maybe you've never met this teacher, maybe you know her, but you've never coached her. What are some ways that you can possibly build a relationship? Anybody want to share? Or are you putting, they're putting it in the
Yes.
chat.
Do a demo lesson for them authentically during coaching, meeting, and interaction. Show interest, honor
Be
their
authentic.
expertise. Be authentic. Pop into their classroom, meet with them during their prep.
Right,
Listen.
and ask about their classroom. So yes, asking questions to them and trying to build a relationship through asking questions. And just trying to build that positive, trusting relationship. And it was interesting that we talked a lot about trust. And that was one of my main things that I was thinking about when I was going to present this slide, is that a teacher has to trust the person that's coaching her. And in order to gain that trust, we have to build a relationship with them. And however we can do that, we have actually been fortunate, Jodie and I, to have had many trainings with, she mentioned Dr. Ernie Mendez, and we were taught strategies that are still valuable to this day of, when you first start, your coaching session, you just don't start into the topic. You ask questions about, how their day was, or you try to get them to not think about it as being like, oh, this person's going to come in and tell me what to do. You want to try to think about it as you're equal with them. And so another thing that in advance, I think it's something that you and your teacher agree about together, about what your coaching topic is going to be, so that you're working side by side versus more of a top-down model. And I think that the agreement helps reduce the anxiety that the teacher might have in the coaching experience, because they know exactly what the topic's going to be about. And so that strength-based relationship, thinking about how to build a strength-based relationship is, we have to think about what the teacher's thinking and what the teacher already knows, and finding those positive things that she's done and what she's doing right. And when we find and we share experiences of what they did do versus what they didn't do, the conversation gets around to where we might want to coach. Because I think because of the fact that they're very proud of themselves when they hear what they've done right. Because sometimes when I initially when I was coaching and I'd go in, they were expecting to hear what they had done wrong, what wasn't right, and what they might need to fix. And oh, what else was I going to talk about here? Jodie, did you have anything else you wanted to say on this?
No, I think you got it. I know our notes are not available, so I appreciate you going off. One thing you did talk about, Kara, and first of all, I just want to mention to everybody, the first couple of slides is really just going over where we're at as far as coaching, where we start in relationship based. So some of these things are going to be very similar and familiar to you all as you're doing this work. One thing we want to look at is a couple of terms that have been introduced to us through our Department of Ed tools. And some of you may be familiar with the family partnership and culture publication. It gave us a couple of definitions that we could guide ourselves in where we are and kind of reflect in the culture when we think about cultural competence. It's being able to really be aware of our own culture, and as the definition says, our practices, customs, morals, theories, and how that may influence our work, how that influence our behavior. And it also says the knowledge is self-coupled with continual efforts to learn about culture of others and how it shapes their behaviors and attitudes. This cultural competence will eventually get into the continuum, but it's an ongoing effort. You know, we're human. It's natural to have biases. I think the importance with understanding and really embracing this definition is just the awareness, being aware of where we're at and making a decision. Okay, well, this is a value that I have. This is a belief system that I grew up with. Is this something that I want to bring in my work today? Or is this something that I can leave in the past, knowing that culture is ever changing? It shapes who we are. Knowing that we work with so many diverse families, we want to be able to learn how to respect our other cultures that we're working with and diversities. That cultural responsive piece is huge. And it doesn't mean that just because we know about a cultural difference that we're able to respect. It's about being able to reflect on our own practices. Where are we at on this continuum? Or where are we at when we think about equity, looking from an equitable oriented lens? And being able to really implement strategies and skills that really allow us to work through differences. Well, what are those strategies and where are they coming from? We, by no means, have mastered this. We will, I'm talking about myself and Kara anyway. This is something that we want to continue the work in ourselves and reflecting on our own practices, reflecting on where we are, what we learned growing up, and really being open to listen to others. You know, as I mentioned, this year has been tough, seeing some of the horrific things that have happened. And I have to share my own personal experiences that years ago, I am so sorry. Years ago, when I first heard or was introduced to the term white privilege, I immediately thought, what is this? You know, I grew up not having a whole lot of money and, you know, not even could say middle income, but why am I privileged? And I didn't get it. And it wasn't until I really started opening up and listening to others and hearing from their experiences and realizing that we really are shaped by what happens in our lifetimes and how we're brought up. And it's not until we really start to seek to understand that we're able to really embrace and respect those of others. So one tool that I absolutely love and resource, I'm not sure if you all are familiar with Julie Olson Edwards. She is a professor outside of New Mexico. She also is the author of the Anti-Bias Curriculum for Ourselves and Young Children. She really has produced and implemented a lot of strategies in her work through her textbooks and also her center in New Mexico. But she also speaks on a couple of different websites, and we'll show you that shortly, from the Department of Ed, and really talks about that self-awareness being key. And in order to really be culture responsive and to embrace and respect others, then we have to be able to ask ourselves, what is it that we need to become an effective coach in this realm? And how do we know that we are? What are we gauging ourselves in? We're going in, we're coaching, we're probing questions. But are we taking the time to really reflect on our own thoughts? And part of that is that, again, that cultural competence piece of really knowing ourselves, knowing that we've come to recognize that life has made us who we are. And as I mentioned, life has made us who we are, not just our personalities, but our social identities. And we have to be able to really reflect that if we're going to effectively work with families in this diverse and equitable world, that we have to be able to understand our life in those terms, if that makes sense. Taking time to think about culture, listen to others, knowing that culture is not fixed. As I mentioned, there may be things in our past that we're not too comfortable and we don't want to bring it forward with us today in our work, and that's okay. We have that choice, we have that beauty. And we have to choose what pieces of our culture are we going to bring into our daily life. What pieces of our culture is going to be a treasure that I'm going to share? And how am I going to move forward? I think that because culture is ever changing, and Julie Olson also speaks highly about this, is that it's okay to be proud of our history and our culture and our racial identities, our language, without being stuck in that box. Again, quoted by Julie Olson. So something that she introduced along with NACCE, which is the National Accreditation for Young Children, is the Cultural Competency Continuum. Many organizations in California also have adopted this. And can I just see a thumbs up if anybody has seen this already? Yes, okay, I see a couple. Okay, great. This one specifically comes from AVID, and AVID is a nonprofit organization that works specifically with educators on professional development. They work to improve readiness for underprivileged children and families, and they provided this and introduced this. Some of these quotes came directly from educators and were anonymously shared, just to give us an idea of what the continuum might look like. So we can see on the left-hand side, it's not as positive. These are areas that basically are eliminating others. They're eliminating and stereotyping. But as we go to the right, we're seeing that things become a little bit more healthier, not as dysfunctional as we see on the left. One thing that Julie Olson in her work, as well as ADVID, the organization that promotes this, is just to be able to share this with educators so we can kind of gauge where we're at. The truth is, we can go back and forth on this continuum, also depending on life experiences. I could say today I'm in one spot, but something may happen tomorrow and I may move back a little bit. And we're human, those things happen. But again, it's the self-awareness piece and being able to reflect and see where are we and where we can possibly enhance our own skills. Knowing that in order to truly be authentic and establish authentic relationships with teachers, we have to be able to have those conversations. So where does that start? Where does that begin? Kara talked about the relationship piece. And that's huge because we know that when there is that relationship, trusting relationship established, people will be more open. But as coaches, also knowing that, upon that first meeting, we may walk in and there may already be a barrier. It could be that perhaps I could be somebody that reminds them of something that wasn't so great. Or maybe I'm a little bit intimidating. Maybe I need to think about that, or maybe I need to consider how I set my climb out up for the day. Are they feeling welcomed? What does that look like? What should I share from my own upbringing that may help build that relationship? I love the continuum, as I mentioned, because it allows us to consistently gauge where we are, but also consider how we can continually move forward. We've had some time to kind of look at this, but I just wanted to pause for a moment and allow for any questions or comments based on anything we've mentioned thus far before we dive into the tool. Okay, thank you. All right. Okay, so lots of comments and agreeing with the self-reflection piece. We want to introduce something that may be helpful to you all. As I mentioned earlier, and I want to emphasize, and we come being very humble and knowing that we are nowhere near being close to experts or even mastering this, that this is something that we're continually working on. One thing that we're really excited about is that there's actually a rubric that we can gauge ourselves. Yes, the continuum is great self-reflection to kind of see where we're at and even think about organization or even teams where we may be. But there are some documents that were released in 2018, as I mentioned earlier. 2018, our Department of Ed released a document, and some of you may have already heard of the early childhood educator competencies. Please don't let that scare you if you're not in early ed, because the piece that we're specifically talking about is that equity-oriented reflection piece. And the reason why we're bringing this up is that this rubric will cover all grade levels into self-reflection, and having coaches have an opportunity to start there before we dive into really supporting teachers and cultural responsive practices. I want to, and I'm hoping this all works, I am going to just go to the actual PDF right now. I want to briefly graze over that, and then I'm going to show you a specific section for coaches. But the PDF, as I mentioned, was developed by a lot of different experts, some from California Credentialing, Commissioning Teacher Credentialing, National Alliance, First Five, 0 to 3, and I'm sure I'm missing a lot, NACI, WestEd, lots of educators that developed all these different levels of competency. So it's not just equity that's available to you. We're just going to point out that equity piece for you. But I'm going to go ahead and open this, and please give me a thumbs up if you're able to view. Yes, awesome. And also a thumbs up if you've seen this before. Okay, all right. So we know that there's lots of different competency areas as educators that we can coach from. The competencies have encompassed these specific areas: learning, culture, diversity and equity, relationships, family engagement, dual language, observation. And this is specific to early ed. However, the culture, diversity and equity is for all educators and coaches. So this was released in 2018, and this is a great rubric for teachers to gauge where they are. However, a year later in 2019, they introduced another tool, and that tool was a supplemental for this one, and it was specific to coaches and adult learning. So I'm going to bring that one up so we can specifically look at that equity piece that we're talking about. I know that Kara talked about relationships and the reflective and strength-based approach. And I'm going to allow you, Kara, if you have anything to add before I dive into the equity and orientation piece. I'm going to go first to page 16. This, guys, is a coach's. I live by this only because I want to make sure that, that I'm continually growing. I want to be able to gauge where I'm at and know that I'm going to be my best when I'm coaching. Does that mean I'm anywhere near it? No, no. But this is a great rubric for us to kind of gauge where we're at. So Kara talked about the positive and trusting relationship. Kara, do you have anything? If not, I can dive right into the equity piece.
I just wanted to say real quick that going back to this and looking at ourselves has been really beneficial for me, because sometimes, you know, we think we get out there, we're coaching, we just kind of follow the same patterns, and coming back and looking at this information again with teachers, you know, because that's the EC competencies to use with teachers. And then as a coach, looking at these, just even preparation for this workshop is just, it's very enlightening. You know, it's very nice to see that, wow, I might not be at a certain area. I'm kind of in the middle of both of these, and what do I need to do in order for me to grow?
And that's the whole approach that we wanted to be able to take with this, is that there are tools out there to see where we are. A lot of times when we're being evaluated, they're not as specific to our role and how we could enhance specifically when it comes to that equity-oriented lens. So this tool allows for that. So Kara talked about the positive relationships and that trust building, and then she went on to the importance of that strength-based approach. So again, you can gauge yourself on these areas and where are you there. The piece that I wanted to really hone in on is that equity-oriented reflection. So this is the piece that is really an area that is going to be ongoing. These kind of discussions and involvement for individuals, as I said, depending on life experiences, could go forward or backwards. But as far as our work, it allows us to really reflect on where we're at. And I'm thinking about some of the teachers that I'm currently working with, and it's coming from a really humble area to know that I am so far from knowing what it's like to be on the other side of some inequities, and I do have privilege, and just really having the opportunity to sit down and critically reflect and listen. And you can see some of the areas here cultivates inquiry and reflection about power, privilege, bias, oppression. It sounds deep, guys, but these are areas that we need to be able to really think about and consider, and basically to be able to have really close relationships, we need to really be able to understand and be open to listen to others and their experiences. You know, there is a vignette in the Family Partnership and Culture publication that talks about a little boy making a statement to a teacher that says, I don't want to listen to you because of, and then he says the ethnicity of this teacher. And it talks about how immediately the teacher was a little taken back, like, did he just say that? This child is 6 years old. But then it has an opportunity for the teacher to really reflect on why might that be happening? Why might a child make a statement like that? And then going deeper to really work with that family to see how they can build a relationship, knowing that they had a horrible experience and that maybe their son may have overheard that. So it really comes back to the relationship piece. As I mentioned, the whole idea of us presenting and talking about this topic is because very often we don't have an area to start with, and these tools are available. They're downloadable. Anybody can access them just by putting in EC Competencies. There's also a website called the EC ComSat, and I would like to just very quickly show the last, there we go. This resource here, the EC ComSat, I'm not going to go on it because I know we're pressured for time. But these are great resources to help us to be able to reflect on our own practice and move forward. There's great strategies on there in working with diverse families. And I just wanted to open it up very briefly. And Kara, if you could help me with the chat to find out if there's any questions. Questions?
No, yeah, for sure. No, I think.
Okay, so the text and publication that I also mentioned was the Family Partnership and Culture, and there's a whole section on there on building and establishing those relationships at an educator level. And also the Anti-Bias Education. There's a second edition by Julie Olson Edwards that is also out. And we're really hoping that, you know, you have an opportunity to kind of go through the rubrics and these specific topics only to help guide us on where can we be and where we can move forward so that we can deepen those relationships and have a more equity oriented lens when working with our coachees. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Kara and Jodie, for your presentation. And we'll end up in the main room in about a minute.